All right, so topic of the day here, Azure Purview 101 with Rowan and the Iteration Insights team. So what I want to do first is just talk a little bit about high-level data governance, because as much as I'm hearing a lot of talk around Purview and a lot of excitement around Purview, I think it's really important to kind of remind everyone that data governance is really kind of a business-driven initiative, and the technology is really there to help support it and aid it. And it isn't just purely a technical endeavor. And if you approach it as purely a technical endeavor because it's a neat new tool that you want to play with and get on your resume and stuff like that, those initiatives aren't going to go very far before they get uh, stopped, like many of the old data governance initiatives did in the past. So maybe just anybody who wants to go ahead and raise their hand if you have an opinion on this. I just want to know, what do you think of when I say data governance? Usually it's something that evokes some emotion or response, but what do people think about when I say data governance? If you want to come off mute, just raise your hand and say what you think about it. It's the first thing that comes to mind. But Timmy, go ahead. And hopefully I pronounced that right.
Hi, yes, you did. Thank you for an amazing session already. I would say data governance is a tool that allows an organization or business to have a consolidated view of their data across many sources.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, data governance, which ultimately allows data users to easily reach data when they want to. That's my understanding of it.
Nice. So you've got a one point of view on data governance, and that's certainly some of the things that we're trying to aspire to when it comes to data governance. One thing that I was wanting to get out of data governance is if you've been part of a data governance initiative in the past, or somebody's tried to inflict data governance on you in the past. Usually what people think about when I say data governance is, oh, that's just something that's going to slow us down. I'm just going to get, they're just there to say no to everything. They're there to lock down all the resources so I can't do my job. And now I got to look for a way to kind of work around everything. And that's kind of the when people think of data governance, they think of it as largely a no endeavor. And that was kind of data governance of the past. And when the past is, there's no real year to draw that in the line because every organization is a little bit different. But largely data governance was really about just trying to lock things down and prevent people from doing stuff. But nowadays, data governance is everything that Rotimi had mentioned, but it's now really more built around enablement and trying to enable users to do their job better, quicker, in a safer, more secure manner. So that's kind of one of the big shifts has been just the enablement side of the world in data governance. And some of that is kind of, I think, driven out of the kind of the newly emerging data cultures that are building in organizations and a different level of collaboration, communication. And we're just at a different point in time now than when data governance, that I know of, was starting to get going back in the 2010, a little bit earlier than that and later, is where it was really a big process driven, lots of documentation, a lot of and just really, hard to get things moving along. Over the course of time, the definition, two primary definitions of data governance really haven't changed. It's really just kind of the organizations around themselves that have changed and started embracing these definitions a little bit more. So two definitions, one from the Data Governance Institute is data governance is a system of decision-making rights and accountabilities for information-related processes executed according to agreed upon models which describe who can take what actions with what information and under what circumstances using what methods. Now, that's a fairly academic definition of data governance. I tend to prefer the DAMA definition myself over on the next slide here, which is the planning, oversight, and control over management of data and the use of data and data-related sources. So I tend to find this one resonates a little bit better, more because it's simple, a little bit more straightforward, and to the point. So where I want to kind of start off here is a business case. So why are we doing governance in the first place? So forget about the technologies. We'll talk about Purview here in a little bit itself, and Steve can get into the demo a little bit. But why are we kind of doing this in the first place? So what we want to do here is we're really trying to get the right information quicker. And if you can think about the average person in an organization is, think about somebody new to an organization that has been given a business question, they ultimately want to get the right answer quicker to the people that are asking for that. And good data governance in behind the scenes can support this. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. They want to be able to, once they get at the information that they need, they want to be able to understand it better and faster. So, if we could go ahead and get that information, we find the data that we want for whatever our business question is, we want to be able to understand it, in better and faster. And we also want to make sure that as an organization, only the right people are getting access to information. So, finance related data, we don't necessarily want, people maybe in our call center getting access to the finance information. Maybe we do, maybe we don't, but that's a decision that needs to be made at the organizational level. We want to make sure that the right people gain access to the information. And it's up really to the organization to decide who the right people are and how we want to go ahead and manage that. And then another one is, preventing exfiltration. So data just going outside our corporate walls to, people that we don't want to have access to that data. So I always like to start it off nice and simple. Is first off, a business question is asked. So, I like to go to the new person in the company. Just think about this as you started in a company in your first day, and somebody's come to you and they've asked you a business question. They've said, I want to understand our sales by product, customer, date, and territory. So a pretty basic question. Uh, and what we kind of want to think about is what are the decisions that are made from that point forward? So realistically, that person's question or next question should be when that is asked is, does something already exist that can answer this? And I know in the kind of historically, somebody could ask a question like this and they'd immediately just start trying to build brand new stuff and build something on their own from scratch to go ahead and answer that. But really, when you think about it organizationally, we should say, does something already exist? And the only way to really know if something exists is to have some type of supporting catalog of what actually is already out there. So those are some of the fundamental building blocks we want to get in place. So that leads to the next question. Well, how do I go about finding it? So how do I find this stuff? What are my options? When I find something, can I actually trust it? Is it something that is in regular use? Is it documented? Is it supported? Now that I found this thing that is looks like it's sales by product, customer, and date and territory, is it something I can stand on? If I go and present that out and it's wrong, am I going to get my hair blown back? Uh, and if I find nothing, what should I do? So if I can't find anything, what are my options? So realistically, that's where you say, well, if I can't find anything and there's nothing to support what is being asked, uh, maybe I should build something from scratch. So then your next question should be, all right, well, if I'm building something from scratch, where do I go and find that data? So in absence of having people around that you can just ask and getting stuff out of people's heads, once again, it would probably be really nice to have a data catalog to say, hey, where are my organizational assets for sale? Where would I find my product list? How do I go and access that stuff? Where is it? Who can I ask for access to that? So all of the things that we think about from a data analytics perspective, uh, governance, good governance and a system that supports it would be very useful to guiding us to answer each one of these questions as we move through each one of them. So if I then go ahead, like I just mentioned a second ago, if I find access, who can grant me access? Am I allowed to access it? Who gets to determine that? Who gets to be the person that says you can or cannot? And if you cannot, why can't you? And who to talk to about getting things? So all those decision rates need to be defined. And then once I have access, how do I interpret that data? There's terminology across many businesses that conflicts. So one I love giving in meetings like this is full-time equivalent. So if anyone's ever done reporting on full-time equivalent, that usually sends shudders up and down to everyone's spine going, ugh, full-time equivalent. We don't even know, how to define that. We don't know, what the business rules are behind it. Every group has a different way of calculating it. And that's usually one that gets people going, oh boy, we really need to get something in place for this and to, give it a good foundation. So there's where we can also get definitions and business rules in place. And once again, this is where having some form or fashion of data catalog or governance system in behind the scenes to help out is really useful. And once I know what I want, the data movement begins. So as I find what I want, now we're going to start moving data around the organization. And that's where something like lineage really becomes quite important to say, well, what is the path that that data traveled across the organization? And once all this is done, and keep in mind, I just described this whole process in 10 minutes. This may take days or weeks or maybe even months to kind of get all sorted out. Now that I'm done, am I sitting on the central truth? How do I let others know what I've built? It's my responsibility to get that back over in the data catalog so the next person that comes along and asks that question has a catalog. And if it's central truth and I'm potentially using Power BI, should I run that through an endorsement process so we can declare it as central truth for the organization? All right, so kind of where to start, and what I really like to say around these types of initiatives is we want to architect big and deliver small. So we want to think big around what this should look like, but we got to deliver things in small, valuable chunks because we need to connect this into real business value and business process. And we need to figure out a way that once we stand something like this up to deliver value immediately so the business users can see what we're building and say, yes, I want that. That makes a lot of sense. And I can connect the dots. So basically the story that I just told you over the last couple of minutes, that gets all cataloged and kept track of in your system of choice. And then this way we can then start using that going forward for that next round of decision making. And we can start this from the bottom up. So, we kind of get some activities going from the bottom up in the organization, get some top-down support. The goal is to kind of meet somewhere in the middle-ish and then get everyone, moving the same direction from a governance perspective. So it's kind of the pillars around this are the data catalog itself, and then taking a look at the lineage to see where information is moving. So the data catalog containing things such as your sources, who owns them, the locations of the data, inside of the tables, what columns there are there, what the terms are, definitions, business rules, and all those types of things. And then finally, the lineage that shows that data moving across your data state. All right, so that's the high level. So now I'm actually going to flip this over to Rowan, excuse me. So I'm thinking Rowan on my team. So I could flip this over to Rowan, and he'll kind of walk you through some of the other parts of Azure outside of the high level here. So over to you, Rowan.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Chris. And I'll just take over the share here for a minute. An excellent overview. And I think the questions that Chris raises there around how we do governance, how we plan for it, how we prepare for it are really critical. And I especially hung on the point about governance shifting from a activity in denial or trying to restrict into an activity of enablement, right? So what you'll start to see as I go through a quick general overview of how Purview addresses some of the governance requirements and governance concerns is when we face the end user or the business user or the analyst user, we are approaching it with a perspective of enablement, of helping them discover and find what they're looking for. Whereas on the back end, we still have the same requirements around governing, administration, profiling our data, and that is done almost as a invisible or transparent activity to our kind of front end users. So we enable on the front end and we allow for the automation of any sort of security and compliance and the types of governance activities that we'd like to do. So let me give you a really quick introduction of what Purview looks like and what Purview brings to the table. So starting first and foremost, one of the benefits that Purview is going to bring to you right out of the gate is this is a cloud native technology. It's a technology that is built on the cloud for the cloud. It acts in a serverless manner, so you don't have to worry about provisioning, monitoring, and maintaining versions or compute under the hood that you have to install the catalog on top of or install the tooling on top of. It is a cloud native technology and it brings with it the best in breed cloud capabilities like a serverless capability to reach across not just data that's sitting inside of a cloud platform like Azure or the other cloud platforms, or data that's sitting inside of your Microsoft tooling that sits on the other clouds that we have, the Dynamics cloud or the Power Platform and Power Apps Office 365 cloud. So serverless integration natively across your cloud platform. And then we also provide you with capabilities, of course, because any modern data estate has these, to extend the capabilities out to a hybrid cloud. So if you have data centers that are on premise or data sources that are on premise still and will remain on premise, we have the ability to extend out to your on-premise environments, or if you have data sitting in other cloud environments, extend out and reach and grasp data back out or metadata back out from those environments too. So number one is cloud native. That's our first kind of most important call out. One of the first core capabilities of Purview here is really around data governance. And I'll spend a bit of time talking, most of the time talking about this. I'll go into some of the other capabilities that the broader Purview capabilities bring, but data governance of your Azure data, of data sitting in databases, data lakes, in reports, in machine learning, workspaces, the ability to govern, discover, classify, label, and track the lineage of this data is one of the first and foremost capabilities that Purview provides. So what I mean by that is we need to be able to provide automation of discovery and automation of updating of our data. So once we set up or configure a data source, no matter where it resides, we want that data source to be able to stay up to date, stay relevant, so that when somebody comes in and looks for that data, they know that they're getting access to the most up-to-date and relevant data. Second thing that we absolutely have to tackle as a part of governance is the classification, tagging, and labeling of our data, right? And that classification and tagging, it can be either IT or system tags that we need to be aware of. So is this PII data? Is this data that is aligned to a particular code that has some sort of like a technical relevance to it? And then what on the flip side are the business users looking for when they need to discover and label this data, right? So what type of data does this pertain to when we look at it from a business function perspective? And then finally, to be able to trust and really have a sense of confidence that the data is coming from sources that we endorse or that have been stamped as kind of record gold copies. We want to make sure that we can track the lineage from our reporting all the way to the source system. So we can track at both a data level as well as a column level where the different data points are coming from and how they flow through ultimately to our consumption layer, our report layer that the business users or our analyst users are reading directly from to be able to make their decisions and understand the business better. So that's governance first and foremost. Second, we have our second core capability around business enablement. So we did talk about how there's a focus really around how does the business team and the analyst team and the data workers need to consume the assets that we curate inside of a data catalog or a data governance solution. So first and foremost, we allow all users to connect through a single UI to find all of their data. So that means anybody who's a data knowledge worker, whether you're a report writer, a data scientist, or a data engineer, or even a steward, you can all come to the same location, search through the same UI, which Iteration Insights will demo for us in a bit, and be able to discover the same assets, filter through the same data assets. So you're no longer going to data assets that you personally know about or that you know because somebody you work with knows about this data set that's being curated off the side of somebody's desk or on a SharePoint list somewhere or sitting inside of like a offline database that's built and maintained by a specific team for a specific purpose, right? So bringing everybody to one point of location to search and discover and access the same data sources. So you have consistency in the results that you get and the insights that you get out of your data. So discovery and search, super important in one single UI. We also provide, as a part of Purview capabilities, data glossary, and this is really focused around how do we enable the business users to add their own tagging and their own classifications and their own labeling on the data so that it is relevant to them. And when they search for it or filter through data assets, they're able to find what they need to find. Third and final pillar here, data state monitoring. So I talked about the enablement of the business users, which is super important for adoption and getting reliable results from our data. But on the back end, we also have the whole process and the actions and the activities that are central to getting data into a clean place, to providing data that is filtered and governed and tagged effectively. Right. So, a big part of that is how do we effectively monitor our data state as well? So if we take a look at the capabilities in Purview, we have capabilities that are locked more to the back end, the stewards, the governance owners, the data source owners, and the curators. And it's all about being able to understand how well the data state is governed, whether or not we are seeing effective and comprehensive governance of the data state. So have we gone through and identified a steward and an owner for all of the critical sources of data? Are we tagging and classifying the data that is critical for our end users in a comprehensive and complete way? Are we keeping all of this information up to date and making sure that this information is relevant to whatever rules and whatever classifications we need today? And then a whole lot more that I'll talk about as well here in the next slide. So how do we address this? Purview provides 3 capabilities in a kind of a technical or a complete implementation. We're going to talk a lot about data governance today because that is the focus of this topic, and data governance is also, I think, paramount to getting started down this journey. And data governance is all about how do we make sure that our data is protected with the right rules, the right role assignments, and is monitored with the right metrics and provided and discoverable in a way that is convenient and user-friendly to our end user teams. So data governance, I think, is at the heart of all of this, but it is really important that we support data governance with a comprehensive data security strategy as well. And then also we back up that security strategy with compliance management also, right? And so what that would look like is your data strategy might define key things around who can access the data, whether data needs to be audited or monitored. And then compliance management would have to do with how do we reinforce this? How do we make sure special investigations are done in an effective way, in an automated way? And how do we assign certain risk mitigating rules against our data? So let's take a look at these 3 core capabilities that Purview provides and list out in more detail what this would look like. All right, so if you take a look at the top, you have our 3 kind of pillars here, the governance, the security, and the compliance that make up a comprehensive or complete governance solution. Data governance, of course, the capabilities that we're looking at and focused on unlocking are really around that end user enablement. So the data discovery, the business glossary and terminology. There's also all of the core functionality around actually maintaining and administering that data, right? So data quality, sharing, ownership and stewardship, classification and labeling. And so what Purview it does is it provides us with a bunch of capabilities that we'll spend more time talking about around mapping out that data so that you can understand the completeness of your data state, where different source systems lie, where different data sets are deposited and curated. It also has the cataloging and discovery portion. So it's like a search that anybody can come in, leverage, filter by kind of their significant areas or that their interest areas, and then being able to track through to lineage. So we'll talk about that in a second, and we'll spend maybe the rest of the time drilling into that. Security, however, really important, primarily a function of the CISO, the security officer or information officers in our organizations. they're concerned about, are the right people accessing the right data, right? So am I able to see data that I'm not supposed to see? Am I able to discover and find and access data that I'm not supposed to be accessing? Do I have data that is encrypted properly? Does it have the right level of ownership? Do I have data loss prevention, which can prevent people from deleting data either through accident or malicious? Or do I have capabilities to prevent people from even extracting and taking data offline with them? Right. So the security officer is very concerned about, how do I secure my data and my data state, no matter where it resides, right? Whether it's in Office 365 or SharePoint, whether it's sitting in Teams, or whether it's sitting in a database somewhere in Azure. Right. And so the capabilities that Purview provides through its security and compliance portions and features is around that data loss prevention, being able to provide insider risk mitigation. So assigning policies of who and where and when they can access certain data, as well as data lifecycle management, so that you're aging out data or you're taking data offline when it's no longer relevant or access expires for whatever reason, right? Compliance. Compliance is a very large and custom and complicated topic, right? And requires often investigation and capabilities that are looking into maybe a security breach or into like a regular exercise where you want to make sure that we don't have any gaps in our data protection or in our data security. So we also bring capabilities around how to do investigation, how to tag data with sensitivity labels, and being able to track and audit the users of our data, as well as even go so far as taking and automating with an alerting system. How do we keep track of improper access or suspicious access to our data? So this is just a quick overview of some of those capabilities as well, if we wanted to dig into them, right? So of course, the supporting of audit logs, of events, being able to set retention policies. We have the data mapping and the data catalog, which is critical for data search, data discovery, and being able to access data quickly and easily. And then we have everything through information protection and compliance management, which has to do with when people can access data, when people can download data. If I'm accessing data from within my network or outside of my network, and I've downloaded, let's say, a spreadsheet or a report, does that report need to be locked because I'm not sitting in a secure location or I'm not logged into my corporate VPN, as an example? So at a very high level, Purview as a comprehensive platform, the ability to draw from, of course, data sitting inside the Microsoft Intelligent Cloud Platform, as well as M365, as well as reach into multi-cloud or hybrid cloud platform locations. We have, of course, the catalog and the data governance, but we also branch into information protection, compliance, and securing of the data as well. If I drill into just the capabilities around data governance, it is mapped out, or it is aligned to these 4 core capabilities, or I should really say 5 core capabilities, right? Data cataloging, which is probably the most seen and sought after capability that I talk about, which is all around how do you do discovery and how do you do inventory of your data. So being able to bring data together in a place that's easily searchable and discoverable. We also have capabilities around sharing. So this is a preview feature right now, but within your data catalog, within your Purview environment, you're able to do in-place data sharing or data replicated sharing out to different consumers. So you can set policies around when somebody can access a particular piece of data or a table within a database. And then you can set that with an expiration. So the individual can go in and they can self-serve, or it can be done through an automated workflow to set up the right reviews and triggers to do that sharing. And it can be set with an expiration date as well. So sharing can be terminated at the end of, say, a project or end of a natural life cycle of a particular data set. Data set estate insights and policies is all around how the stewards and the security officers monitor and get a sense of the maturity of their governance program, as well as the maturity of their data estate. So we are able to say how much of our data estate is mapped to owners, how much of our data estate is fully tagged, classified, and has the right types of policies that we're looking for assigned to it. And then finally, underneath all of that is our data map. So our data map is really about getting that comprehensive full picture of all of the data sources, from transactional and application databases all the way through to our analytical data lakes and warehouses and reports on the business and analyst user side. So I have some slides here or screenshots here to quickly give you an overview. I won't belabor these because I know Steve Richardson is gearing up to do a quick demo of these as well. But starting with the governance capability, number one is the data map, right? So the data map really is it's a graphical or tabular, depending on your preference. It's a full catalog or inventory of all of your data sources. You can set up a hierarchy that maps to the logics of grouping or the logic of ownership and governance within your organization here. And it allows you to set up rules, tagging and scanning and the automation of all of that to keep it up to date right from within this UI or within this interface. So you're able to see like maybe part of a particular project or part of a particular domain. You have all of these databases, and those databases flow through into these ETL pipelines and into these reports. You're able to see all of that kind of collected together and then assign the right classification rules, the right business glossary rules, and assign the right frequency of update that you would like this to be kind of maintained. So that's your map. We look at the catalog search and browse as well. So there's quite a nice and robust search capability. It leverages our search capabilities through the natural Microsoft search capabilities inside of our knowledge bases. And so you can use kind of your keywords. Those keywords can be linked to either classifications, names, like the actual names of everything from like a data source to a table name to a column. And it can even be aligned to a business glossary, right? So it keeps track of your search history, your access history. So it's convenient for any end user to be able to go back to their favorite source systems or their favorite data sources to read from that data again. So the search interface also allows you to forego the search, and you can also access data via a source-driven or domain-driven navigation. So you can click into, let's say, all of your reports, and then from within your reports, you can drill into all the reports that belong to a particular workspace, and then drill into the reports that belong to there. So you have kind of more of like a navigational approach that you can drill into more granularity to find what you're looking for, or you can go through the search interface and then do the filtering interface directly against that to find what you're looking for and narrow down the results. Maybe even find something that you didn't know existed, and you can request access from the steward or from the self-serve data policy and data access portal as well. This brings us to this data sharing portal or the data access policy, right? So the ability to source data currently from Azure Data Lake Store and Blob Store, although extending to other capabilities as it comes out of preview. And what we're looking at is the ability to either self-serve or set up an approval gated type of a request and access pattern for people to be able to grab data from a location that they didn't have access to prior, right? So you can set up a request, and then a policy owner or steward owner can go in and take a look at the requests to the data that they are accountable for, that they're owners on, and be able to approve or deny those requests with conditions. So a single place within the catalog to say, okay, I found this data set. Now I want to access this data set. Please, Mr. or Mrs. Steward, give me access to the relevant data that I'm looking for. The estates and insights, there's a whole portal and a subsection around the comprehensiveness or the completeness of the data curation, right? So if we bring data online, however, we assign no stewards, no owners. We haven't tagged it or classified any of the data. The data was left to be scanned maybe 6 months ago, so it's out of date. We want to make sure that that capability is reflected so that as overall owners of our data estate, as a governance exercise, we can go back in and make sure that everything is up to date according to our SLAs and our policies so that we ensure that things have been classified properly, that there's a business glossary definition assigned to it, that we've assigned data sensitivity labels to the right data sources that we needed assigned to, that we're keeping it up to date. So if we're doing like a monthly update of the data sources, or if we're doing a quarterly update of the data sources, we're actually hitting those timeframes to make sure that everything is kept in a clean and relevant state. So we can keep track of the overall governance completeness of our data estate as well. And then finally, data access can be done through the backend as well. As a steward, you can grant users access. You don't have to go into the portal, let's say, or go into your ACLs, or necessarily go into your CLI in Azure to be able to grant access. We can grant access via the portal directly here. So that can simplify some of the access grants that we would like to. So just to wrap it up and tie it all together, if we look back at the 3 critical areas that support data governance, of course, the governing of the data itself is the core function and very, very primary to what we do, but we also need to secure the data. And then finally, we need to leverage compliance capabilities to make sure that the data is in fact secured, and we can investigate and audit and can set follow-up actions off of that, or restrictions off of that. All of this hopefully comes together to enable kind of the 4 capabilities that we really want to walk away with when we have good governance in place. So the ability to discover the data, right? The analysts or the engineers or the report writers come in and are able to find the data that they're looking for, to be able to access the data that they're looking for. The second functionality that we absolutely want to enable is the description of the data, right? So is the data tagged and classified? Is it have business glossaries? Is it understood correctly as the domain, or where it actually belongs to inside of our organizational data hierarchy? We want to manage the data, right? So we want to make sure that that catalog is up to date, that we have stewards assigned to the data. We want to make sure that the data is clean. So we want to manage that data. And then finally, with all of this, we're able to democratize the data effectively. So be able to allow users to come in, self-serve access, be able to request access if it needs to be checked, be able to find the relevant data that they need for their activities, their reporting, their machine learning, and etc. So with that, hopefully we can see this in action. So I'll hand it over to Steve Richardson to take over and actually give us a quick look.
All right, thank you. Let me just make sure I selected the right window. Hopefully you can see the portal here. As mentioned, this is a cloud-based service, and your access and everything like that is going to be granted through Azure Analytics, not Analytics, Azure AD. And once you get in there, same thing carries through. What you can see and what you have access to do is all based on roles and user groups and users and things like that. So the home page is the catalog, basically. You have, like Rowan mentioned, there's a couple of ways to get through the catalog. You can create a search, and then the search will take you to all the assets you can see that have that terminology in it. And as you can see, it brought up all kinds of things: project, child tables, source tables in different directories, raw, enhanced, all kinds of stuff like that shows up. The other method he mentioned was browsing through collections and sources. So I have a few collections set up. I go to time entry source, selection collection, and it shows me all the various assets that are available there. Or if you are more familiar and you don't have to search by name and you say, okay, I know I'm in a data lake, I know we're in this data lake, then you can drill through the structure of that data lake to end up at that data asset. And when you click into it, you will see the various aspects of that this guy does have a couple of classifications, and I'll talk about that shortly. No real properties, but we have the schema displayable. This one doesn't. Weird. I selected the wrong one. One of them does actually have lineage. I should show that. There we go. Much better one. And it will show you from source to target all the steps that went into creating that field. Then if you're specifically saying, okay, where did bill rate come from? You click that over here, it will highlight the path that it showed up to show up in that final source, target, I mean, and bill amount. So we have two sources come in here. The rate and the amount of time came in through different tables, ended up in the final fact. Those are all sort of the things you can access through the data catalog. And then here is where we have a glossary. So, you can set up multiple glossaries, and within each glossary, you can set up multiple terms, business terms that people can understand, provide clarity to the data. That sort of information is very useful. And how that data gets in there, because you see things that have been scanned, and this is basically where you start adding those things up. You build up a structure of collections, you add data sources to a collection, and then you run scans on those data sources, and it brings in that metadata, that lineage on various things into Purview. And it's there to provide you help, basically, to do your data governance. What you have to be aware of in collections is if you have rights to read this collection, you have rights to see everything in that collection. And that's where this whole idea of structuring collections based on your company and down to various levels comes in, because you may not want everybody to see everything. You may not want your finance people to be able to deal with, I don't know, operational data, or probably the other way around, operational people not seeing finance data or playing with that sort of role. And these two, data sources and data collections, are very sort of tied together. So, you can say, come in here, we have a collection. We can find out who is the owner. Basically, I am, because this is a demo environment. So I'm the collection admin. We can change collection admins if we want to. We can add more collections. And I mentioned sales, so we can create a sales collection. And if we want to apply someone else's role to be that manager, we can say, okay, let's look at little Jared. And we'll assign him as the owner of that. And then you have a new collection that'll be back here. We can come into here and then add new data sources. So we'll say data lake, and it will show you what's available. One thing to keep in mind when I say for collections, you do have to have some idea. So having some idea of what your policies, how you want to have people access it, who you want to see things, comes into how you set up these collections. Or there's little things like, I've already added this data lake. I cannot add him again. You can only add him to one collection. So if you had something where you had a curated folder in one data lake, an enhanced folder in that same data lake, and a raw folder in that same data lake, and you wanted to split it up so that people could only see the curated layer, you can't actually do that because it's in that collection. It gets scanned into that collection. Everything in that collection is viewable by the reader of that collection. You can limit the scan to say, I only want to look at the curated folder, but then the other data assets in that source would not come in. And you do that by playing with the scan parameters when you go in there. So we'll add a different data lake in here. And do that one. I think I haven't added that one. And then it shows up. So when you get into these things and what you're scanning for, basically, there's a whole bunch of classifications that are built in. A lot of government ones, Australia, Canada, Denmark, all kinds of things. But you can also add your own custom classifications. And classifications at that level, these apply to the asset as a whole, the table as a whole, or the file as a whole. So you can define these things and we can have good names. You can use these as filter criteria in the searches. Whereas the difference between a classification and a classification rule is the classification rule applies to the field that's within a table, within the file. So this will apply your classification because when it scans, it's going to look at that information that you've set up. Okay, doesn't want to show it there. And it will, look for the pattern that you have set up in the classification. So we create a new one. You can say, okay, regular expression. Okay. And we want this to belong to, where is he? There he is. That high level classification. So my classification is now going to end up with 2 classification rules if I actually accepted it. And then you can say, okay, you can put in regex. So that will search through certain patterns within the files to say, hey, this matches the pattern. Or you can say, I just want to look at files that have a column pattern called salary. And then it will tag everything in when it does a scan. If a column says salary, it's going to tag it with this classification rule, and that will be displayed when you look at the data catalog. And how that shows up, we'll get there eventually, is when you set up scan rule sets. Here are the built-in ones that are already built in that Microsoft provides, the government financial ones. But you also say, I have a custom rule. I am looking for those specific column names or regex patterns in the data or that sort of thing. And then when that comes in, where are we? 2 minutes left. Okay. You can go back to your data catalog, and if you browse it, I know we've done this, so you can say, when you're searching, you have these various criteria, and some of those criteria are those classification rules that we set up. So when I ran it, these tables have that HR rule. So if I go into that HR rule, it's going to say, hey, that custom classification was in there. So I know I have an issue. I need to look in it. And, I'm talking as a data curator. But if you were a business analyst and you were browsing the asset, same deal. You'd say, okay, I want back to employee. If I didn't already have access, this is where you would request access to that source record to see that table if you did not currently have it. And that is a workflow that I just haven't turned on, but you can create the workflow, set it up. It would go into the workflow management, and all of that sort of access and security access to these files comes in there. You can also say, okay, I'm a curator again. I need to classify my facts and dimensions to say, hey, they're available to my users. So you'd go in through the catalog again, find those assets that have been scanned in, then you could go into them. And here is the ones I've got selected. So now you can say, okay, I want to add a classification to those. And what was it available? It's one of the custom classifications I added. And then we can say, okay, that's good. Let's add another one. We'll say, hey, we had that glossary terms. So we'll add that glossary value to the attribute. And now say, okay, let's create a steward. And I'll pick on Jared again if he's not here. And so now he's that. So now I apply that, and it will show, hey, we've got an owner. We don't have the expert applied. It's got terms and the classifications added. So if we go back to the actual table, we'll see those classifications have been added. There is the classification that I've said, hey, it's available. Here is Jared as the owner, so I know who I need to talk to if I have to go in there. Here's the one that showed up in the custom scan. Those are the values I added to say, hey, I want you to put a classification on those specific files or fields within the various files. And that's how you build up over time all these assets to make, you know, the data catalog more useful, the classification system more useful, people being able to find out what's available to them and be able to use everything that helps that estate. And then I didn't get into some of the other things because this environment hasn't been long enough that the insights in this part has not actually run yet. So if I had run it, it would say, hey, this is how many have curators, owners. This is the last time it was in here. This is all where it would show up. And this data estate insights is what feature in the management you turn on to get that. And you can schedule it for weekly or monthly or daily or things like that. And I'm over time. 103.
Awesome demo, Steve. Thank you very much for that. So yeah, I think you kind of take a look, at kind of what Steve has put together there. And if you thought about a large organization to go back and kind of backfill all the stuff, that would seem like a rather daunting task for sure. But I think kind of where a good starting point is to kind of get the processes in place early and get a relevant project you're working on now and start building up the catalog up on something existing with good processes, and then you start to get a data catalog that you can populate in parallel with a project and actually get people to see it in use, and then build the case up for why you want to start doing more of it and pushing forward into it. So just want to thank Steve for putting the demo together, and of course Rowan for his part in the presentation as well. I think you both did a fantastic job, and I know I'm really excited about where this whole data governance thing is going to start going over the next little while here. Any final words, Rowan?
No, thank you very much. And feel free to reach out to Iteration Insights, Chris or myself, any questions that anyone might have.
Excellent. With that, have a good day, and we'll see you at the next Azure Analytics User Group on September 26th.